This is an overview of verbs in Latin. Please note that I'm going to refer to two different handouts from our class, the first being titled Verb Attributes in Latin, the second being titled Verb Master List. Please take them out and follow along with the video. We need to know 5 things about every verb in Latin, the first thing being person. If the subject is I or we, the verb is first person because the subject is the speaker. If the subject is you, it's a second person verb because second person verbs are used to describe speaking to someone. And if the subject is he, she, it, or they, you've got a third person verb because third person speaks about people, things, places. So let's take a look at the second page of the verb master list, our present tense, and just take a look at an example. So you can see how this chart works horizontally in terms of person. So if the pronoun subject is I or ego, it's going to be first person. If it's to or you, second, or if it's issa, it, third. So let's take a look at what that means, because in Latin, I don't have to have ego to issa, it. I don't have to say ego porto. Porto on its own means I carry. Portas on its own means you carry. Portat on its own means he, she, or it carries. And whether it's he, she, or it depends on the context of the sentence. So I don't have to put this pronoun in. That's why they're going to be in parentheses. So is, ea, or id. Those are all optional. So you're looking at the verb ending. And the verb ending will tell you the person. So if the verb ending is an O, that means the subject is I is a first person pronoun. If the subject is S, that means the subject, if the ending is S, that means the subject is you is a second person ending. So basically our first person verbs are I and we in English, O and mus are the verb endings that you're going to see on Latin verbs that are going to show us that in Latin. If you see S or tis, it's second person because the subject of that will be you. And if you see T or NT, your subject is he, she, it, or they respectively, and so that's going to be a third person verb. So very much like person, the second attribute is number, and that's going to be shown in our verb too. So our verb ending rather. So singular or plural is what we're talking about when we refer to number. So OST, they refer to I, you, he, she, and it. They're singular verbs. They're singular endings, and so the verb is singular if it ends in O, S, or T. If it ends in mus, tis, or nt, the verb is plural because these are all plural endings. So that's pretty straightforward. Another thing that our endings are going to show us is the tense of the verb. So let's take a look back at the first page of our verb master list, because we don't deal with all of these yet, and I just want you to be aware of them. So we have 6 tenses in Latin. They're called present, imperfect, or future, or perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect. And if you're asked the tense of the verb, you're going to give one of these as an answer. You're going to say pluperfect or present or imperfect. You're never going to tell me something is past tense because past is an English term. All right, so the present, imperfect, and future tense are going to use the present stem. That means that the stem is used for these 3 tenses. That's all that is. So we kind of divide these 6 tenses up into 2 different systems, and all that means is that these 3 tenses share one stem, these 3 tenses share a different stem. So you need to know 2 stems, 2 stem types essentially for every verb. So let's quickly talk about active versus passive. So we have voice is another attribute. I'm going to skip mood for right now. We'll talk about that at the end. But when we talk about voice of a verb, we're talking about whether it's active or passive. So let's take a look at the present tense examples first. So basically, an active verb is normal. The subject acts on the verb like I carry. So that's going to be active. For a passive verb, the subject receives the action of the verb, and so portor means I am carried. And these are going to be your endings no matter what conjugation. So OST, mustasenti for present active, or restur, murmuri, enter for present passive. So we have this other attribute to think about. So when we're talking about how to find the stem of a verb, no matter what tense you're trying to form, you're going to start with a stem, you're going to add endings. Everything's in the verb ending, so that's an important point to remember. So, to find the present stem, you have to decide which conjugation a verb is. So if you're going to try to form the present, the imperfect, or the future tense, you need to have the present stem. And so I need to know if my verb is first, second, third, or fourth conjugation. A first and second conjugation verb is going to find its stem one way. So if the infinitive ends in are, it's first conjugation. If the infinitive ends in ere with a long e, and that long e is important, it's going to be second conjugation. And to form a first or second conjugation present stem, I'm taking the re off of the infinitive. So portare becomes porta, sedere becomes sede. And for third and fourth conjugation verbs, the infinitives will be either ere with a short e, again, very important, or ire with a macron. And you're going to go to the first principal part and take the o off of it to find that stem. So it really depends on your conjugation. You'll note that if it's first or second conjugation, the stem ends in a vowel, and for third or fourth conjugation, the stem will end in either a consonant or an I. So that's an important thing to remember. Consonant, because that can really affect you. For the perfect stem, if a verb is active, you're going to just take the I off the third principal part for all conjugations. Super easy. And then if it's passive, you're going to take the fourth principal part, use it as an adjective, and pair it with a form of sum. So let's take a look at all of our tenses now. So we've talked about present tense. We're going to go through that. For the imperfect tense, the verb is going to be, like the idea is was happening, still could be. So I'm still using this O or M sometimes. ST, mus, tis, nt. And then I have a tense indicator of ba. So when you think imperfect, you want to think ba. You're going to have ba between your stem and your ending. So you can think of bam, bas, bat, bamas, batas, bant as your present imperfect and as your imperfect active endings. Or you can think of it as OST, mustis, nt plus ba in between, however you want to do that. So porta bam is I was carrying or I used to carry. You can translate it either way. And then in the passive, what I've seen before as my passive present endings, I saw ar, ris, ter, murmini, entor, and now we put ba in front of them. So ba plus ar is bar. Ba plus ris is baris. So bar, baris, baris, bomber, bomini, bantor. That's a tongue twister. So porta bat, for example, means he, she, it was carrying, or he, she, it used to carry. Porta bator is he, she, or it was being carried, or he, she, or it used to be carried. So that's the passive voice. When we go into the future tense, please note that for first and second conjugation, you have one set of endings for the active and passive. And if it's third or fourth conjugation, it's going to have a separate set of endings. So again, this is just to explain the notes sheet that you have. I'm not going to read all this to you, but please note that you have two separate sets of endings. So when something's future, you really have to consider which conjugation the verb is. So always have that vocab list out until it's memorized. When we get to the perfect tense, we're switching stems. So now I'm going to use my third principal part minus I plus active. So I have portav, however you want to say it, plus my perfect endings, est it, emis istis erant. And then portavi is I carried or I have carried. So perfect tense. Perfect literally means completed. So once something's completed, you can say I carried it, I have carried it, it's done. In the passive, I'm using my fourth principal part plus a form of sum. And so for perfect passive, I'm going to use the present of sum. So portatus sum is I was carried. Now, please note that this is kind of an adjective form, essentially. So that's why it's going to have to change. So Julia portata est is Julia was carried. Please pardon my handwriting. And then Julius portatus est is Julius was carried. So it has to agree with the subject, and that's why we treat it like an adjective. And so you can say was carried or have been carried for perfect passive. For the pluperfect tense, that's going to be the translating as the I had verbed tense. So there's one way to translate it. And you're going to use that perfect stem again. So portav plus eram, eras, eramus, eratus, erant, which consequently are the imperfect forms of sum. So that's easy to remember. Portav eram is I had carried. If I make it passive, I'm using that fourth principal part as an adjective. And then I'm using, again, the imperfect of sum. So portatus sum is I had been carried. For future perfect is this completed future action idea. So by the end of the day, I will have gone to school. By the end of the day, I will have cleaned the kitchen, something like that. So you're still going to use that perfect stem, portav, and you're going to add almost the future of sum, but note that it's errant instead of errant. So ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritus, erint are the future perfect active endings. And then the future perfect passive is super easy because you're just using that fourth principal part as an adjective, joining it with a form, the future form of sum. So hopefully this makes some sense in terms of forming your tenses. And this is a lot to take in, so just sit with that chart open for as long as you need it. The more you use the tenses, the more you see them, the more comfortable you'll be, because it really is about practice. So just feel free to have your notes out until you don't need them anymore. The last attribute of a verb that I put in parentheses here is called mood. And the mood refers to kind of the feeling that you have, like the approach to the verb. I don't really know how to put that into words. So basically all the verbs we know, all of these verbs, all of these endings for all the tenses that we just looked at, no matter what tense it is, those are all indicative. So indicative is like normal. And so if it's not indicative, it's because it's imperative. And this is just a quick review of imperative verbs. Those are the commands. So that's when you take the present stem and you use it in the singular as a command. So woka is call, we day is see. And then in the plural, you add te to it. So if you want to tell multiple people to call you, you could say wokate me. But if you just want one person to call you, you say wokame. If you want one person to listen, you say audi me. And if you want everyone to listen to you, you say audite me. So imperative is a mood that we know, and then everything else is indicative. And we'll talk about subjunctive in like Latin 3. So that's the plan for right now. Please let me know if you have any questions, but hopefully this will help you review your